Now, in principle, Indian Constitution once again guarantees these recognitions and equal treatments. Article 15 of the Constitution says the state has the right to make special treatment for women, children, and for the development of backward class, SC and ST. Article 16 ensures right to equal opportunity with provision for preferential treatments of vulnerable groups. Article 23 ensures right against exploitation, including abolition of child labor and forced labor. But the ground reality again is far from ideal. Women, for just one example, women in fishery sector are most vulnerable. Often their huge contributions in the fishery sector, particularly in small scale fisheries, go unrecognized. Even there is no authentic data. We struggle to find data on total number of fisherwomen active in India. Moving on to the next guiding principle, number 6, and that is consultation and participation. And it is about ensuring active, free, effective, meaningful and informed participation of small-scale fishing communities, including indigenous peoples, taking into account the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And this should include feedback and support from those who could be affected by decisions prior to these decisions being taken and responding to their contributions. So basically it's about free, prior, informed consent. And if we look at the reality in the Indian context, we see Article 40 and then the 73rd, 74th Amendment of the Constitution actually empowers local self-government and lead to further decentralization of power, decentralization of decision making. There are provisions for environmental impact assessments, public hearings and social audits in case of big projects. So though agreed on principle, but these provisions for inclusive governance are often, we know who work with the fisher people, are not practiced adequately on ground. Free, prior, informed consent and active participation in decision making need to be further strengthened, and this could be further strengthened by strengthening local self-government, Panchayati Raj institutions. But in most cases, vulnerable groups like small-scale fishers don't have access to that space for local level decision making, and that needs to be strengthened. Now I'm moving on to the 7th guiding principles of VGSSF, and that is rule of law, and this means adopting a rules-based approach for small-scale fisheries through laws that are widely published in applicable languages, applicable to all, equally enforced and independently educated, and that are consistent with existing obligations of voluntary commitments under national and international law or soft law. And here the reality check is fishery related laws in India so far are more fish production and oriented, processing oriented, etc., and less fishers welfare oriented, with few exceptions certainly. Even the welfare schemes which are there in place do not have inherent human rights approach and widely varies from one state to another in design and implementation. We don't see any conscious efforts from the lawmakers to ensure a compliance with international instruments. So some laws are there which are even contradictory, contributing to further vulnerability of the community. The 8th guiding principles of VGSSF is transparency, and the 9th is accountability. Transparency is described as clearly defining and widely publicizing policies, laws and procedures and decisions in applicable languages and in formats accessible to all. And accountability means holding individuals, public agencies and non-state actors responsible for their actions and decisions according to the principles of the rule of law. And the reality check here in the Indian context is Article 29 guarantees that citizens have right to receive information in their own languages. We know in India we have right to information, we have social audits and all these systems there, at least on principle. The practices of publicizing decisions in state languages are followed, but unfortunately often things end there. A real effort is hardly seen to ensure everyone's access to information, and holding duty bearers accountable is not such a common practice at grassroots. The local authorities and powerful lobby enjoy a kind of impunity and when it comes to small-scale fishers, there is hardly anyone to listen to them and treat them at par. Moving on to the 10th and 11th guiding principles. 10th guiding principles is economic, social and environmental sustainability, and this is applying the precautionary approach and risk management to guard against undesirable outcomes, including overexploitation of fishery resources and negative environmental, social and economic impacts. And the 11th is quite linked. It is holistic and integrated approaches, recognizing the ecosystem approach to fisheries as an important guiding principle, embracing the notions of comprehensiveness and sustainability of all parts of ecosystems, as well as the livelihoods of small-scale fishing communities, and ensuring cross-sectoral coordination as small-scale fisheries are closely linked to the two and dependent on many other sectors. Guidelines, this is the voluntary guidelines guiding principles. In the Indian context, we see that the small-scale fishers and small-scale fishery is struggling for the recognition in Indian human rights law and policy framework. There is an unfair competition with industrial fishing lobby, and states' role to regulate and safeguard fishery resources is often inadequate. For example, provisions are there to keep trawlers away from near shore or to restrict use of destructive gears, but the implementation level challenges are huge. Also, lately we have seen some changes in policies that may lead to increased competition for coastal resources and fishery resources, which certainly go against ecosystem approach to fisheries. Ecosystem approach to fisheries needs to be embedded in all fisheries related policies linked with production of fish, management of resources and welfare of the community. Now coming to the last two guiding principles of the guidelines, that is social responsibility and feasibility and social and economic viability. Social responsibility, the guidelines, the guiding principle says promoting community solidarity and collective and corporate responsibility, collaboration and fostering collaboration among stakeholders. And by feasibility and social and economic viability, the guiding principle says ensuring that policies, strategies, plans and actions for improving small-scale fisheries, governance and development are socially and economically sound and rational. I am just giving the gist, of course the text is much longer. Now the reality check is the solidarity development in the Indian context we know is much needed. So is collectivization. Though some fisheries cooperatives are there, but many are crisis ridden. Often small scale fishers, in particular women, are left out of this collectivization processes supported by the state. Interface with multi-stakeholders should be initiated by the government while keeping in mind the basic principles of human rights as mentioned above. Policies should be formed in a participatory way and through a bottom-up approach, thus strengthening local government structures or similar structure of traditional fishers, as these are unavoidable to meet guiding principles of voluntary guidelines SSF. Now to conclude, I would like to say India has a constitution which highly values human rights principles. It has several progressive laws, policies and practices. However, these are so far not sufficient to strengthen small-scale fishery adequately. Strengthening small-scale fishery in India would require questioning existing model and ethics of production, questioning structural inequality and gender discriminations, questioning power structure at grassroots which control decision-making processes. We would urge the government to have political will to implement the guidelines. We, the fishers organizations, would also commit to cooperate with the government and other actors for poverty eradication and sustainable development of this sector. It's a long journey, but the journey has started and we have this very significant instrument, voluntary guidelines, small-scale fisheries with us. We are sure small-scale fisher communities, fisher women and youth would certainly be in the forefront of this journey, and we are very optimistic about positive changes. Thank you very much.